Bonelab's lifecycle has been one of the most unpredictable I've seen for a game. It's been a roller coaster of highs and lows, to say the very least. Just when it seemed like Stress Level 0 was finally getting into a rhythm, dropping consistent updates, starting to engage more with the player base, it all just stopped again. So here we are, 6 months between updates, stuck in a pseudo radio silence. So what happened? And more importantly, what's next? Good news, we actually have an idea of what Stress Level 0 is working on for 2025, thanks to a tweet from Brandon earlier this year. More on that in a bit, but first, let's take a step back and look at how we got here. Bonelab's updates have been a mixed bag. While each patch brought valuable improvements and technical fixes, they didn't deliver the kind of new content we saw with Boneworks. This is with the community. Some appreciate the refinements and stability changes, while others are frustrated by the lack of fresh content. They never struck a balance between new content and changes. That said, the later patches, 4, 5, and 6, have arguably been the most significant, especially in improving the still limited SDK. But now, 6 months have passed since the last update, and the big question remains, what can we expect this year? And that brings us to what's next for Bonelab and Stress Level 0 as a whole. Thanks to a tweet from Brandon, we have a pretty clear roadmap for 2025. Brandon says, 25 goals, release patch 789 for Bonelab with Marrow 2, 2.1, 2.2. Bring Boneworks to Quest 3 in parallel on Marrow 2. Pre-production for the next game by X-linking Marrow. We're aiming for compatibility. Boneworks is the nearest kin, but is still tricky. So the biggest focus seems to be on pushing out 3 major patches, each tied to an updated version of Marrow. Marrow 2, 2.1, and 2.2 will likely bring deeper improvements to physics, modding tools, and overall performance. But whether these patches will introduce actual new content or just more back-end changes remains to be seen. I lean towards more back-end changes, if anything. I think Stress Level 0 has been pretty clear with this, that the content is going to come from the modders, not themselves. If anything, they will give modders the tools. So content is probably not coming. If anything, I would love to be proven wrong here, but I just don't see it happening. So Boneworks is coming to Quest 3, but this is only huge if you're one of the 10 people that haven't played the LabWorks mod that's available for Quest 2, which is the actual Boneworks campaign that's modded over. While I think this is cool in theory, I wish this was not happening. Personally, I'd rather they focus on the next game instead of dedicating resources to, I think, what you would call a remaster. That's probably not the appropriate term, but that's what it's going to feel like. I think the consensus is that Boneworks is the far superior game to Bonelab in terms of story and replayability, given that there's really no replayability in Bonelab other than the mods. But I just don't think this is needed. It's one of those things where I'd rather they iterate and come up with new games, new ideas, and stop revisiting old content. And it's not even that old, I'll be honest. Part of me feels like this is just an opportunity for them to capture sales off a vast market because of how much the standalone VR headspace has grown over the last few years. While I understand their motive, I think it's pretty short-sighted, and investing their time into a new game that can appeal to PC VR as well as standalone would probably be the better approach in the long term, just because you're not alienating your PC VR player base. Arguably the most exciting part, Stress Level 0 is starting pre-production for their next game. While there's no confirmation on what this game will be, the fact that they're planning this alongside major engine updates suggests they're building something ambitious. Could it be a true successor to Boneworks, a new IP? We'll have to wait and see. The community consensus seems to suggest the game will be B-side. And if you're not familiar with B-side, I believe Wigwam has a really good B-side video that you should check out. He's done a really nice job of gathering all the research and compiling everything into one video. So interestingly, Stress Level 0 has trademarks for B-side, Dead FM, Hall of the Machine King, and Marrow. The trademarks for B-side, Dead FM, and Hall of the Machine King were all filed in June of 2022, about half a year after Bonelab's trademark. And for those that don't know, you can actually look up a company's filed trademarks as they are all publicly available. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. It's something that I actually look at every now and again just to see if Stress Level 0 does file any trademarks. Trademarks are a good way to see what a company is up to and what potential products they might be releasing in the future. So for Bonelab, for example, we could have seen that trademark well in advance. At this point, Bonelab feels like it's in an odd place. On one hand, we're still getting updates, patch 7, 8, and 9 are coming, and they're tied to major upgrades with Marrow 2. That shows that Stress Level 0 isn't abandoning the game just yet. But on the other hand, these patches don't necessarily mean new content. They seem more focused on improving the engine, modding tools, and overall stability. So is Bonelab even the focus still? With Stress Level 0 working to bring Boneworks to Quest 3 and already moving into pre-production for their next game, it's fair to ask, how much longer will Bonelab be a priority? Right now, it seems like these updates are more about laying the groundwork for future projects rather than expanding Bonelab itself. Marrow 2 is a huge part of Stress Level 0's future, and these patches are likely meant to refine it before it gets used to their next big game. That means Bonelab might just be the testing ground, if you will. Looking at the bigger picture, Bonelab might not have been meant to be a long-term project, but rather a transitional game, something that gave Stress Level 0 the space to experiment, refine Marrow, and push VR physics further than ever before. In a way, it feels like a giant sandbox, not just for players, but for SLZ themselves. A place where they could test new mechanics, see how far they could take, and explore modding potential in ways that they couldn't with Boneworks. But here's the thing, when you look at Bonelab through that lens, it starts to make sense why it never got the same kind of post-launch content that Boneworks did. Maybe it was never supposed to. Instead, it seems like Stress Level 0 was using it as a stepping stone, a way to lay the foundation for something much bigger. And these final patches, focusing on Marrow 2, 2.1, and 2.2, rather than adding new content, it feels more and more like Bonelab was just one phase in a much larger plan. If that's true, then everything we've seen so far, from the SDK updates to the Boneworks Quest 3 port, this could be leading to something entirely new. That wouldn't be surprising. If we think about how Boneworks was essentially a proof of concept for advanced VR physics, Bonelab might be serving the same role, but for modding, scalability, and standalone VR support. If that's the case, these final patches could be tightening up the last loose ends before Stress Level 0 shifts its focus to their next project. And that means Bonelab's time in the spotlight could be coming to an end as it's served its purpose. Well, I'd love to know what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and before you go, thank you so much for watching. Your support means a lot. And don't forget to subscribe if you did enjoy this, and hit the notification bell for more videos when they go live. We'll see you in the next one.